Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as
3 hours of punching out the best version of yourself. Oh my gosh, it's tiring. And so for the rest of the day, I was
totally
messed up.
Exhausting.
Oh, so exhausting. And I actually had pretty bad depression as well on radio. But for the first 3 hours, I was amazing.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. All right, so as I record this, my animals are making a lot of noise in the background, and one of them definitely makes a cameo on this episode. You'll hear my cat Spot. It's a mess. You'll hear it. There have been some great webinars lately in the continuing stream of webinars the Tourette Association of America does for the community. They just did one titled The Emotional Aspects of Tourette Syndrome. On August 12th is the Educational Aspects of Tourette Syndrome, as my cats make more noise in the background. I don't know if you can hear that. On August 17th, for Spanish speakers, is Supporting Your Children's Transition Back to School Post-Pandemic. On August 19th is the English language version of it. Patty Mendoza is conducting those. And if you go to YouTube and you just type in Tourette Association of America, you'll find their channel, and it's loaded with all kinds of topics from webinars they've done in the past on myriad topics related to tic disorders and anxiety and sleep and ADHD. All kinds of things, all the things you see on that Tourette iceberg graphic, if you're probably familiar with that. So just don't forget that resource is available to you for free. Really great programs and webinars. For what's coming up, go to tourette.org. It's TOURETTE.org and click attend an event, and it'll take you right to it. Listener question here. Hey, Ben. I've listened to so many episodes where you've talked about music and how much it means to you. I feel the same as you, but I can't listen to music when I need to concentrate on a task, like writing an email. I just think about the music instead and have to turn it off, which changes my mood. I know that sounds strange, but you might know. And that's a question I got, or rather a comment, sent in from a listener named Amanda. And yeah, I'm the same way. Music is so central to everything for me, like when I'm doing virtually anything, cleaning the house, editing photos, whatever it is. Taking a walk, music is on, and I'm really intentional about the kind of music I'm listening to at any given time. The tone, the pace, the time period, whether it's majority major chords or minor chords, basically, whether it sounds happy or sad. The genre, is jazz going to work better for what I'm doing right now? Is punk going to work better or whatever? And I love that process of finding the perfect band or the perfect album to listen to for a certain moment. And I'll change it as soon as I feel like I need to. But if I need to read or something like that, yeah, I have to turn it off. I have to turn the music off. And yeah, that does have a sort of emotional impact on me. Turning off music, like that moment where it's music and it's working for you and you're listening to it, then you hit stop. I mean, I guess I could like fade it out with the volume knob or something like that, but I don't. I hit stop. And that has an impact on my mood. It will almost instantly change how I feel. And the funny thing is, I can be listening to a band or something, and what they're playing is perfect for the mood I'm in and what I'm doing. And then I have to hit pause to do something that, that music might interfere with. And then after, I put music right back on, but it's usually going to be something totally different than what I was listening to right before. It's almost like hitting pause, and that weird emotional knock that comes with it obliterates my rhythm or my connection with what I was listening to, and I have to find something new because my mood and pace has changed at that point. So I might go from listening to music with a bunch of major chords and sounds happy to listening to music with a bunch of minor chords, which sounds kind of sad. It's funny that always happens. I'd like to hear from you on that if you can relate somehow. There's a contact form at tourettespodcast.com, or you can just go to tourettespodcast@gmail.com. On this episode, we're talking with a guy from Australia who knew Tourette syndrome might be a problem for his goal to be on TV, to be in front of people, have an audience. And so he was like, don't care, I'm doing it. And he did. And for sure, it's not as straightforward as that. It's not like I'm going to overcome my obstacles. Boom, I've overcome them. Not as straightforward as that, but he talks about what's worked for him. to get him to where he wants to be. And he comes from the motivational speaker type of cloth. I know sometimes, we hear from motivational speaker type people and it just kind of sounds hollow, a bunch of platitudes and, feel good, you can do it, that kind of thing. And it kind of makes it hard to take seriously, but that's not what I get from Seamus, our guest this week. He still keeps an emphasis on, being a human being and what hurts and what was difficult, essentially wounding yourself, being vulnerable and keeping with it, practicing to close up that wound and get better. Now, there's one part in this conversation where I make some general statement in the course of discussing that concept that was kind of an incomplete thought on my end. I hope you know how that goes. I made the statement that the fallout isn't what you think it's going to be or isn't as bad as you think it's going to be when you open up a vulnerable part of yourself. And while that's been true for me in the past few years, in certain circumstances, I guess, I know that's not the case for everybody. It's certainly not always that clean. Different life experiences may have dramatically different outcomes to opening themselves up and being vulnerable. So just wanted to complete that thought. I think the point is that taking that risk, or at least thinking about it, can realign certain things for you. And that seems to be the point for Seamus Evans, our guest out of Brisbane, Australia. He's a stand-up comedian. He does keynote speeches. He's been a radio guy, a TV guy. And this is stuff I used to do and could relate to pretty heavily on a nervous buzz. But like when it comes to, say, being in a really nervous environment, like you have Tourette syndrome, and guess what? You're about to be on TV in front of a big audience. And this TV appearance has nothing to do with Tourette syndrome. So people in the audience don't know why you seem to be, such a weirdo, quote unquote. But being so vulnerable as to put yourself on television without priming the audience for who you are or anything like that, because it doesn't really work that way. Being that vulnerable is kind of a great equalizer, or at least it can be. Let me read something from Seamus's website. He says of his time as a television interviewer, quote, "There have been many times where I would interview someone who was funny, engaging, intelligent, and a professional in their field. Yet, as soon as the camera came out, they would shut down like a cafe during COVID-19. End quote. Like, it's them too. When the chaos going inside the mind is all about, like, wow, I have a big audience right now. How am I going to come off? I think putting Tourette syndrome out of context before a big audience like that sort of jars up some interesting things when people do it. David Begnaud, John Bedell, people we've talked to on this podcast whose careers involve being on TV and being really great at it, but with a period of history of doing that, not being open about having Tourette syndrome and having to kind of keep that in the head and negotiate with that as you see the red light turn on that you're on the air. If you can't relate to that and you're like, no way, that's not the direction I'm taking my life, I can't imagine, can't relate, that's awesome, because while I want this podcast to feel familiar to everyone listening in the course of discussing life experiences, I don't want it to be just everything you already know and feel anyway. So I'm not sure I could do what Seamus does at his level, but his point isn't, be vulnerable and do what I do. It's more about crossing certain lines you might have set for yourself, maybe in recognition of the lines you perhaps can't cross for whatever reason, but just chipping toward it. And anyway, I'm not the wordsmith on this stuff, Seamus is. So let's just fade into the conversation, which picks right up after Seamus asks me about opening up with my TS to my bosses and my colleagues at work. Just off the bat, just kind of, it made them a bit nervous. I could tell when they were asking me questions about my life and all that, it made me a bit nervous based on their level of nervousness. I think they were kind of being more careful with how they regarded me. And I kind of had to tell them at one point, I was like, I'm not different at all now that you know this. You can address me in the same way. You don't have to be more sensitive around me or anything. I just want you to know. And they were cool with it. And it took some time for them to, I think, maybe kind of forget that I told them.
Yeah.
You could tell like they were cool with it, but it made them the slightest bit uncomfortable because they just didn't have the experience. But for a period of time, it was definitely, I was still ticking more freely and openly, but, and they noticed that for sure. But it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
So how did you go beforehand, before coming out and telling them during work? How did you go disguising your tics? Were you suppressing or were you disguising them?
I was doing a bit of both.
Yeah, okay.
So after I left journalism, and I was doing this, I'm basically doing the same thing now, but just for for an advocacy group. So it's kind of like nonprofit, but one-sided, I guess, media work that I'm doing now. And I would have to sit in like legislative committee meetings when the House and the Senate were passing bills and things like that. And I would have to do my best to to hold something in. And if I had to make a noise, I would add like a cough to it, or just something to kind of, make it seem like, okay, he's just coughing or whatever. Because it's a very tense political environment. And if you act like a quote unquote weirdo, they're going to throw you out. And
they're gonna be like, what are you doing?
Like that, it's like that pressure was on. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to, for my own good, so I can do the job and all that, I'm just going to mask and suppress. And as soon as I got in my car, that's where the fireworks happened.
Yeah, they go bananas. A technique that I like to use is in a situation like that, where it's like, hey, probably not best to tick at this particular time, whatever it is. If I'm sitting, I just jitter my legs. I usually tap my feet 24/7, like I'm a constant fidgeter. But I have found that if I'm standing up or whatever, if I'm just constantly moving, very slightly, just moving around, adjusting the way I'm standing, moving my knees, going from arms folded to arms down, like not so obvious, but just constantly moving instead of standing dead still. It's kind of like when you have a grain of sand in your shirt and then you hold the shirt by to the two corners and then just lightly jiggle it. The sand comes out. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And I have found that doing that, it just gets them out, and it just removes that constant itch that I need to scratch, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, it's always a quest to try to find things like that work for you individually, and where the pressure valve is, and what's your technique for turning it, and by how much, and there's such a comfort level, I guess, factor with it. But I would definitely do that. It's like with every tick that I had, vocal or motor, I kind of had like a routine to go along with it. Not when I planned out. It was just something I would do in the moment that, if I had my arm stretching tick, I would kind of, just act like I was stretching in a normal way, even though I would do it again and again. And if it got to a point where maybe it looked too conspicuous, I would excuse myself because I didn't want to be, the center of attention, especially not in like a political or a news environment. And yeah, it's weird. That's kind of always with me, almost on autopilot, without having to think of it. There are certain times or certain situations or scenarios I'll be in, and the masking is just kind of automatic, almost like it's like a legacy thing that I do, even though I'm a lot more comfortable ticking openly and answering questions if people have them. But it's just like the ghost that stays with you.
Yeah.
Let's set you up. Could you tell us your name and the general part of the world you live in, and what you do for a living, or how you would introduce yourself to this kind of audience?
My name is Seamus Evans, and I live in Brisbane, Australia. I am an ambassador for Tourette Syndrome Association Australia, and over my 13-year career, I've been a television host, a radio personality. Currently, I'm a stand-up comedian, and I'm a public speaker. So I go into schools and organisations all over Australia, and I share my challenging and triumphant journey of overcoming the challenges associated with Tourette syndrome in order to work on television, and then pursue a career in the media for 13 years that I never actually thought was capable.
That's really interesting so let me just quote from your website, because I have it up right now. Part says, "We're all faced with adversity in some way or another. Mine was Tourette syndrome, ADHD, depression, anxiety, and failing school," end quote. And Seamus, me too. I mean, exactly that. And I don't know to what degree of finding my own way out of the difficult territory was intentional or strategic or plotting, or simply just from growth and experience, or just a process that works itself out. Some of it was intentional, and I think some of it was just growth and my ability to reason better with myself, which can make the intentional changes easier over time, depending on the situation. But nowadays, with what you do, I mean, you're a public figure with stand-up comedy, keynote speeches, television, radio, things that might horrify a portion of the Tourette audience that might identify as really introverted, like myself too. So there's the anxiety, the what are people thinking when they look at me? Did you get into this kind of stuff because you saw it as a challenge or something you wanted to overcome, or did it find you and you just kind of like used your whatever resources you had to stick with it? Or how'd you get into being so public with your story and wanting to talk to other people, but also with Tourette being such a forward-facing part of it?
So if we go right back to the beginning, all I wanted to be was on television growing up. That's all I wanted. I wanted to be,
Right.
the next big thing, have my own talk show. I wanted to write scripts. I wanted to interview famous people. That's all I wanted. And then, I really struggled in school. I hated school. I never applied myself, and I was always struggling to do the work. I really didn't like it.
Yep.
So what happened is I failed. Like, I graduated with horrible marks. And I couldn't go to uni. And I was like, what am I going to do? And honestly, it was a really lucky moment in my life, because that's all I wanted to be was on television. And up until this point, I pretended I didn't have Tourette's, because, going through adolescence, I was diagnosed at 10, but I was born with it.
Yeah.
And, going through adolescence, geez, that's hard enough, and then adding those elements of, if I'm trying to flirt with the girl at the party, what's wrong with Seamus? He's weird. He keeps ticking, so those little things would play in my mind. And I just kind of pretended I didn't have it. I was never forthcoming with it. If people asked, yeah, sure, I'd answer it if I felt like it, and I'd brush it off or whatever. But it was a real sense of embarrassment. And then when it came to, I was really lucky enough to get a job on television. At 18, first year out of school, I got an audition and I got a job. It was a cartoon show for kids. So in between the cartoons, you'd have fun little hostings, right? Where it's a local theme park and you do crazy things, you interview people, you pull things on your head, this kind of show,
Yeah.
But a week into the job, the boss pulls me aside and says, why do you keep twitching? And I said, I've got Tourette's, because I wasn't so forthcoming with it. And he flipped out, and he was a bit, he freaked out and was like, well, you're still under probation. So if your Tourette's is a problem, we can just fire you and get someone else. And so I was really, this is it. This is all I wanted. This is the only thing I thought I was capable of, because I've always been a bit of a performer. I've always been an extrovert. I've always been someone who likes getting people's attention and cracking jokes, like right from a young age. And this is the only thing I thought I could do. And right there, my Tourette's was going to stop that from happening. And so that's when I took it upon myself to start working on it, because up until then I was just suppressing, because I'd be like, I did drama at school or a performance. That's fine. I can just not do it. But now this was a job. This wasn't a once a fortnight assessment piece. And so I went through so many different trials of how I can manipulate my tics. And I was the only one growing up. I had never met anyone else with Tourette's. We never had any sort of, me and my family, we never went to any sort of support groups, anything like that. And so I just had to get to work, because I wanted this job. And so my technique was really understanding how my body is going, understanding and registering the tics, and instead of holding them and suppressing them, slightly trying to let them out, but in more discreet ways. And over the course of however long, I, just by trial and error, I turned large head nods into stomach rolls or butt clenches. And instead of large hand flicks, it was, knee clenches and clicking my heels together. Just tiny little things like that over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And I ended up working on television for 7 years. I hosted 2 different shows, and I had an amazing career. It was great. And then the reason why I've got into public speaking and being an ambassador for Tourette syndrome is, so after television, I went into radio, and I wanted to become a breakfast radio host. And so I quit my job on television. I did the most extreme, like, I'm going to do it, man. I'm going to quit, pack my bags and move to the big city, man. I'm going to do it. And when I was that age, I was about 25 when I did that. And I was full of ego. My head was massive, because I in my 20s, I had just been on television for 7 years across the country. Like, even one of the shows I was on 53 different countries around the world. And at 20, I had I thought quite highly of myself. And I thought, I'm going to just walk into a breakfast radio job. And then I quickly found out that that was really difficult and no one cared. I was on kids' TV. So I spent a year really struggling. I struggled with my mental health because my massive ego of, I've got this, man, I'm the best. That crumbled to you're nothing. No one cares about you. And I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? A huge imposter syndrome hit because I went from a lucky break at the beginning, a once in a lifetime opportunity to get an audition. And now I was up against everyone else and I didn't have that lucky break. I had to work for it. So imposter syndrome just overpowered me, and constantly, you're not good enough. No one cares. You're not funny. It's never going to work. And then this trying to build myself back up again because I was just in this horrible, depressed rut because I had no money. I was in a big city and I was not what I wanted to be. So I spent a year constantly just trying to survive, trying to, push on, send that next email, make that next phone call, make that next shift, just constantly building the resilience to keep on pushing on. And then I did. Right. I was lucky enough again to get a breakfast radio job in a place called Albury-Wodonga, which is a very small country town here in Australia on the border of New South Wales and Victoria. And so there began my radio career, and I did 5 years on radio, and I absolutely loved it. I fell in love with radio. It was amazing. I did 5 years. I did 2 years in Albury, and then I did 2 years in a place called Cairns in far north Queensland. And now a lot of people think that everything in Australia kills you. Everything in Cairns in far north Queensland kills you. You can't go swimming in the beach because there are massive crocodiles there. And then if there's not crocodiles, there's stingers. It'll just sting you to death. I loved that place. It was incredible. And then what happened, to make a long story short, after 13 years of having a career that I didn't think was possible because they were going to fire me after the first week because I had Tourette's. After 13 years, because of COVID-19, the boss of the radio station, they called us in and said, listen, we've got to let you guys go. Sorry. And made us redundant. And then when I came, I was like, well, what am I going to do now? I came back home to back under my mum and dad's house and back to my home roots because I left 7 years earlier to just pursue the dream career. Yeah. And I did nothing for about 4 months. And it was the best thing I ever did because it opened up my mind. I got out of the media bubble because when you're in that world of breakfast radio, television, and trying to pursue that sort of fame, you're like a dog with a bone. That's all you want. And now, because I was out of it, I kind of thought, hey, there's a few other things I can do. And what I had this moment of, look, the last 13 years has been incredible. You've had such a great time, but it's been all about you. It's all it was about me and look at me and I'm doing this or whatever. So I decided, why don't give back? Why don't try and share your story in the hopes that I can speak to, someone in their adolescence who's going through whatever it is. It doesn't have to be Tourette's. It doesn't have to be ADHD, whatever it is. So at the end of the day, we're all insecure at something. We all have something we're embarrassed by. We all have something we consider a flaw. And it kind of breaks my heart to think that that's going to hold someone back, because when I got the opportunity to be on television, I didn't let Tourette's hold me back. And I don't want that to happen to anyone else, especially even when for example, when I give talks in organizations. Something else that I get really frustrated by or that really upsets me is when someone is in a job that they don't like, but they feel they can't get out of it and they feel they can't chase their dreams. And because I did it, I think everyone else can, because like I said, I failed high school. I honestly, so the second television show I worked on was Totally Wild. And that is more of a, it's like a mini documentary series, but for kids. So your stories are 3 minutes long and it's very well written. You've got to research, you've got to write scripts, you've got to write to pictures, it's really, and I could barely read or write. So I had to teach myself how to actually read and write properly. I'd read books at night and I'd write blogs and things, because the last thing, I really hate the idea of someone being in a job that they don't like, but they don't think they can pursue their dream. So that's what I've decided to do. I've decided to kind of encourage people to change the way they look at themselves, to say, oh, look, yeah, I've got something wrong with me, or that I consider wrong with me. Maybe it's not wrong, and maybe it's not a flaw, and I can still do whatever it is that I want to do and not have that hold me back. And secondly, being able to go and talk to so many people and share my experiences with Tourette syndrome to spread awareness is great, because when I was young, no one knew about it. When I was the only one who had it, and I never knew anyone else that had it. And so I guess it's going to normalize it, because if you feel different, then you feel weird. And when you see someone else who has it, or when you hear more information about it, it reaffirms, hey, it's okay. You're normal. Like, it's okay. You're fine. You're not weird. It's completely normal to have X, Y, Z. And so, I think this is my way now of reaching out to the little Seamus, at 10 years old or 12 years old or 16 years old, when I felt horribly embarrassed when I was going through that adolescence, to essentially give him a big hug and say, you go for it, man. It's all good. It's fine. And so that's essentially what I'm doing now. That's the reason why I do it.
I've definitely had conversations with I'm 41. I've definitely had talks with my, 16-year-old self, and I think who I was fronting as being at the time and what I was covering up and all of that. And it just seems like all my messages to my past self are that the fallout isn't what you think it's going to be. And I just feel like every time I have taken that kind of risk where I've put myself out there, it's paid off in a way where I'm glad that I did it. It might've been painful. It might've been nerve-wracking, which is either opening up about Tourette syndrome, or I used to do radio just like you. And I used to do, have to do TV news segments when I was a newspaper reporter, and I was horribly uncomfortable. And I had to remind myself too, that everybody was uncomfortable. Like just the regular, I guess, quote unquote, rank and file people out there. You may be an expert on something. You may be called to, be interviewed on TV or something like that. It's a nerve-wracking experience because you don't want your mind to go blank, and you don't, it's like nerves can really make your brain invisible to you. And I mean, so is that something you do? Do you help people with their comfort level when it comes to being more open in public, or at least just crossing the line of being more themselves, less nervous, and all of that?
So the main takeaways from my talks, I essentially share the 3 pillars that helped me overcome my adversity and to have the confidence to pursue my dreams. And those 3 pillars are acceptance. So I had to accept the fact that I was different. I had to accept the fact that I had Tourette's and stop ignoring it. I had to accept the fact that I struggled to read and write, and that I was illiterate, and that I failed school. I had to accept my flaws and strengths. That's the number one thing. That's what I had to start with. And then I lent into my personality. So I had to accept my personality for its ups and downs, its flaws and strengths, whatever. And then I lent into it, and I embraced it and completely was like, yeah, this is me. This is me, whatever. And after doing that, I discovered the second pillar, which is passion. After accepting my personality and who I am, I discovered a passion. And my passion was actually radio and stand-up comedy. Although I loved television, and that's what I wanted from a young age, after, that first process of accepting, I was like, hang on, I really like radio. I really like breakfast radio. And I discovered that passion. And then after discovering the passion, I became determined. So acceptance, passion, and determination, because after discovering the passion, and I quit my job and I moved to Melbourne, and I, went through no money, depression, all that sort of stuff. I had to become determined to achieve it instead of giving up, because every single week, because I'd get a low paycheck, how was I going to survive? My housemate at the time, he was an engineer, so he's having pizza, burgers, pasta, whatever, and I'm sitting there with mashed potato. and every single day I was like, Seamus, just quit. And I was like, nah, quit tomorrow, quit next week. Just push on, get through today, because I was determined. And after, an 8-month period or a year long, however it roughly was, that's when I first got my first break. So the 3 main pillars that I really express are acceptance, passion, and determination. And I firmly believe, and this is speaking from experience, once you go through those, you can achieve anything. Because once you accept who you are, you discover your passion. And then once you discover your passion, you stop at nothing to achieve it. And it's like a basic formula. And that's what I did. And speaking from experience, that's what worked for me. So in doing that, I hope that at least one person listening goes, actually, maybe I can do it. And then they just give it a go. That's the only thing that matters to me. But yeah, I think in doing those three things, you do get confidence because you're constantly knocked back. You've taken the first step and you realize that after accepting yourself and living in your full personality, it's not that bad. People don't react the way you think they're going to react. It's just the same as, telling someone a secret about yourself. It's something you're embarrassed and they're going to go, yeah, so what? It's not as bad.
Yeah, I've definitely found that to be true. And a lot of times when I just bring up a vulnerability about myself, just in the course of conversation, something comes up and I open up and I say something about myself that might otherwise be, embarrassing or just something you don't talk about and so often the person I'm talking to either says, me too, to like some degree, or they'll say, oh, my brother or my sister, or there's some frame of reference. And if not, I find that for the most part, people are, and I know this is not the universal experience of everybody, but I find that people are receptive. And even if, it makes them maybe nervous that they're talking to you and you're telling them something personal about yourself and they're not sure how they should act in return, should they smile? Should they give a concerned face? People really psych themselves out, but that's I think another good thing to remember when you're talking to people is that, sometimes they're trying to figure out how to say it as well, how to play their part to be supportive of you. And it may not come out quite all that, it might come out clunky. And, it's, I think on both ends, it can be kind of like an interesting experience to share vulnerable information and receive it. And another thing too, like, getting to a level of acceptance, there's not always an easy trick to get there. Were there any starting points that you had or anything that just kind of occurred to you one day that this is something I could do?
I think it was a matter of over time. I think there was a very long time when I was younger. I really, truly was unhappy. I was unhappy with myself and I didn't like my personality. Because I was a bit of a weirdo and an extrovert, I kind of was a bit more of an open book than everyone else, or, I just did strange things like to be funny or whatever it was. I was constantly being looked at like, oh, you're weird, or oh, Seamus is too loud. This constant, like, essentially social rejection. And so over time, that really started to affect me. And then I was sick of it. Like I was sick of feeling down about who I was as a person. So I stopped hiding it. And then it was just a moment of going, stuff it. Who cares? If they don't like it, whatever, I just won't hang out with them. Like it was just this over a long period of time of feeling insecure, self-conscious, trying to project another side of myself. Of going, you know what? I'm sick of it. I don't care. I just kind of got to a point where if I noticed I was annoying someone or I could feel them being a bit reluctant to engage with me or retracting away from me because of my loud personality, then I'd just leave them be and I'd go someone else, to someone who kind of gravitated towards it. And then, I just kind of, I guess I stopped caring. I was like, I'm not going to impress you. I don't give a stuff anymore, man. That's essentially,
One thing you said earlier about, you kind of caught a break. Some people, will term something a lucky break when you really might have just positioned yourself to notice this break coming to you, or it may have been coming anyway, but you were in a better position to notice it and grab it. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. I am actually, yes, I said it was lucky, but I'm going to contradict myself and I say I don't actually believe in luck, because I read a little while ago, this really stuck with me. It said, luck is preparation meets opportunity. So you're right. At that time, I had spent the last however many years at school being in drama, acting and doing all these kinds of things. And then the first few months out of school, I was working at after school care. So I was an extrovert performer, literally working with kids. So I was prepared for that opportunity. I was prepared for that opening. And just the same with my breakfast radio first proper job. I had spent the last 8 months obsessing over radio, learning everything there was about it, being a promotions guy. But I would force my way into the studio, and I would just make the guy who's behind the desk teach me. I say, what are you doing here? And I would force my way in. I got told to leave so many times, but I just keep going back. And I would listen to...
Not today.
Yeah. And I would listen to every breakfast radio show, afternoon show. I became obsessed, and I learned everything. So although it took me 8 months to get that opportunity, it wasn't luck. It's just finally that opportunity came around. And that's what I'm trying to express about determination, because eventually you get there. Eventually it happens. You just have to be prepared enough for that opportunity. Because, for example, if I got that opportunity in Albury, my first breakfast radio job, when I left Totally Wild, no, I was not prepared. There's no way I would have been ready. So, I guess. I mean, I did say I was lucky, but it's about working your ass off, if I'm honest. Becoming obsessed and working your ass off.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and for, more introverted people listening who have maybe kind of a different personality or different approach. Yeah, I'm definitely more introverted. And I find, though, that sometimes that time you spend by yourself is when you're, kind of giving diligence to your talent and you're developing your skill, or it's, like the guy who just sits in his bedroom and practices guitar solos all day. And then somebody hears him and he's amazing. It's like, wow, how'd you learn this stuff? It's like, I just stayed in my room and practiced all day. And, there are definitely avenues and opportunities for all different levels of comfort in public and interacting with people to hone a skill that you have. And that's where I find that you can get a lot of confidence from. And that has helped me out of my introversion in certain regards. When I feel good enough and in command enough of the subject that I know to be able to work with other people and not worry about failing in front of them or whatever it is. And, that's been a big part of it for me, I guess. Yeah.
I actually am doing a lot of kind of personal research on glossophobia, which is the fear of public speaking. And I've been researching a lot of the different studies that have been published by different universities. And what I'm finding is that the number one essential cure to glossophobia, to speaking in public, is exposure therapy. You just have to do it. And it's kind of like when people, friends of mine or people who want to get into radio, they say, how do I do it? I say, just start. Turn your phone on record mode and just start. You just have to start doing it. If people want to do comedy, sign up to an open mic night. You just have to start doing it. If you want to write or be a writer, you just have to start. Like, it doesn't mean you're going to get published straight away, but it means you're starting, you're beginning. You just have to do it. And once you start doing it, it gets easier and easier and easier. And then all of a sudden, by the time you do get your opportunity, you've written 1,000 pages or you've written 50 articles that never got published or whatever it is. But the first most important step towards succeeding or developing or whatever is beginning, is starting.
Right.
That's what I've found anyway.
Yeah. I that's definitely what I've done. I mean, I don't know what was right or wrong or effective or ineffective or what in combination with medication was the formula for me or what, but I mean, pretty much every time. I remember this too. I remember my first day of kindergarten when I was 5 years old, and I just sobbed throughout the whole thing because I was away from my home and from my comfort zone and with new people my age who intimidated me. And, it was like, I carried that for a pretty long time. Even when I changed schools, when I got to first grade, that same experience. I didn't want to go. I think I was just some inconsolable mess because I was going to be out of my comfort zone, away from my things in my room or whatever it was. And then a few days later, it's fine. And a couple episodes ago, I actually talked about this. I have an office that, we've been out of the office, since the pandemic. Well, we just went back. We just had like a big grand, like all 120 of us working there, got back into the office. And I had a straight up panic attack because I wasn't ready for it. It was just, it was there. And the effects, like my hands and lips start going kind of numb, and I just know all the signs. I'm like, oh boy, here it comes. I thought I was in a good mood, but here it comes. And it was a tough time, but I've been through it so many times and taken so many, I guess, self-awareness notes about myself to know what was going to happen next. And so the surprises were, I guess, less hard hitting when they came, when I hit like a new phase of that level of panic. And so, and that's a little bit different than what you're talking about, but there is like a rhythm and a repetition to where you could develop a familiarity. The very first time I was on the radio or the first time I was on TV, it was horrible. It's like terrible. And I'm glad I didn't decide then and there. I almost did, but I'm glad I didn't decide then and there that was, going to be it for me. I shouldn't do this anymore because I'm not cut out for it. Second time was better. Third time was way better, and I mean, it sounds like nonsense talking about it because maybe it's easier said than done, but it's really true when you practice it.
Yeah. As you said that, I remembered my first ever show on breakfast radio the first day. And literally, so we were on air at 6 a.m. We got in at like, I think 4:30, 5 o'clock, whatever it is. So on air at 6, off air at 9. And at 7:30, I was like, I'm going to quit. This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I can't do this. I'm not cut out. Nah, this is hard.
Yeah.
Look, starting's hard. It's hard work.
So, you learn to accept yourself, and it takes practice, but you get there, and then that's what led you to the second pillar of, was it passion? Is that what you said the second one was?
So what I found personally was after I had accepted myself. So for example, accepting the fact that my friends like football and I don't. And instead of being embarrassed and trying to pretend that I do, like, oh yeah, no, I like that player too. Oh yeah, no, that was a bloody great guy.
Yeah.
No. I don't like it. Just accept it and don't pretend. So little things, I'd start saying like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't watch it. I don't care. I don't like it. And then, just like what we're talking about over repetition and little things like that will be like, oh, I like watching funny stuff. I like watching Family Guy. I like watching stand-up comedy. And I like doing this. And it was different from everyone else. But what happened is in all aspects of my life, I was starting to accept. It wasn't just the Tourette's thing. There was other things like, oh, I really struggle with this. Okay, that's a struggle. What don't you struggle with? Just constantly questioning and being aware and not holding back, not masking, not pretending I didn't, just accepting. And what happened is it opened up avenues and interests. And I was like, hey, I like this. And then over a period of time, I found a passion because, there are so many times you talk to people and they're like, how do you know what you want to do? And it's so hard to answer that. And I found the way I answered it was through acceptance, through accepting who I was and exploring all of my interests and likes and noticing how I feel when I guess, do something. So, for example, as I was driving to work every day, I'd listen to the breakfast radio show. And I would listen to it and I would imagine myself doing it. And I was immensely happy. And I was like, well, maybe that's it. That's what I want to do. And that was essentially just discovering my passion. And then I was, that's what it was essentially.
It's neat how you can fall into that. Cause if I look on Instagram and you see all these people with just amazing artistic talents and people commenting like, oh my God, like, how'd you do that? Whether it's like a magic trick or it's like a pencil sketch you drew or something like that. It's just thinking about how much of a bummer it would be if these people didn't put in the work to get to where they are. And it's, I know there's natural talent, and I put that in quotes, whatever that is, but I don't believe for a second that like none of them worked on it to get better.
Totally.
That they're, what you're looking at is like them mastering what they fell into or found an interest into that may have been completely accidental. And that was me with photography. I mean, there are plenty of tie-ins over the course of my career, but I wanted to be a musician forever. And then I got into journalism because I liked writing. And it was in that process that I found videography. And I'm like, okay, this is the real thing for me. Then I found photography, just straight up stills photography. And that's taken over my life and didn't expect it. And all kinds of things have grown out of that because I feel like what you were saying earlier about all these little things that you can accept.
Yeah.
There is kind of an assumption maybe that like everybody's on the same page with this and it's easy to go along with it to not be awkward. And there are plenty of times where I've done that, or I think I've pretended to be, like, yeah, I've seen that movie or, just something to like cross over and just grant what they're trying to tell me or relate to me on, versus me saying, yeah, I don't really know about that, or I'm not a fan of that kind of movie, or whatever it is. And it's like you're carving yourself into something that you're going to be able to see at some point as something uniquely yourself. And that's a really glossy way of saying it, but that's what I found to be true for me.
Absolutely. And honestly, being in radio changed my life, not just from a career standpoint, but from a psychological standpoint, because what I learned was any opinion you have, anything you want to say, anything you feel or you honestly think, someone else will agree with. The problem is you can't see them. So it took me a very long time as a radio host to actually be confident in what I want to say and what I want to think, because I always had this thing in my mind. I had two people on either side of my mind when I wanted to say a joke or say an opinion or say what I truly thought. The one of them was, he's such an idiot. He's a bloody fool. You know, what an idiot. He's not funny. He just thinks whatever. And the next one was, that's so good, Seamus, keep going. And so I was like a lost dog. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. And I was like, oh my gosh. And typically they would be people that I know. So one was a bully in primary school, you know, that would always say those things to me. And the other one was a good friend of mine. I do exactly this. Yeah. And so what would happen is I'd like, I don't know who to listen to. And instead I would half-ass it, and I wouldn't say properly what I thought. I wouldn't fully expand on my opinion, and I wouldn't make the punchline of the joke. And then I realized, hang on, these people they're only in my head. Like they're not actually listening, and I don't know what they're going to think. And that's when it took me a solid year of half-assing everything essentially and being too scared. And then I finally just went, stuff it. And I just got rid of them. And then that's when I really started to find myself as a personality on air.
The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support to those with Tourette syndrome or tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports the authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the TS community. To learn more, visit tourette.org, TOURETTE.org. Was there a moment where it felt like things were clearing up, or was this a pretty slow fade from the difficulty into finally feeling a degree of comfort where you were? Or was it the kind of thing where like, I just nailed it today? Like, I feel really good about what I did today. The diction was good, and the phrasing was good, and, you know, no flubs, or was it just like something that just had to take time?
It took time. And also what it wasn't one day, it was an accumulation of many days. So yeah. For example, my boss at the time, he said, your aim is not to, you know, get a 10 out of 10. Your aim is to get, so for example, he said, your aim is not to get a 10 out of 10 today. Your aim is to get a 7 out of 10 every day, because you'll get a 10 out of 10 today, and tomorrow you're going to get a 6. Okay, well, that's inconsistent with the audience, and they're not going to really gel with you. But if you consistently every single day hit a 7, you're going to get consistency, you're going to get loyal listenership, and you're going to build a reliable, loyal audience. And so what I started to fall into is, it wasn't necessarily nailing the day, it was nailing myself. So for example, I would have to find techniques to be in the right mind frame. And I actually use this technique with stand-up comedy. I need to be in the right mind frame to perform properly. I need to be in the right mood. Everything needs to align up and sync up. And I do some rituals beforehand to actually put myself in the right mind. And I started experimenting with all these different little things every single day. I'd try different breakfast. I'd try different, you know, stretching beforehand, just constantly trying these different things. So every single day I can hit a consistent level of my own mental happiness, because as a performer, as a personality, you know, you've got to be you've got to be at your peak. You've got to be at your best personality. And I found that with radio was really difficult because 3 hours of punching out the best version of yourself, oh my gosh, it's tiring. And so for the rest of the day, I was
totally
messed up.
Exhausting.
Oh, so exhausting. And I actually had pretty bad depression as well on radio. But for the first 3 hours, I was amazing.
Do you find that when you're doing radio, so I remember what my boss at the radio station said. I think he told me, don't try to sound like a radio guy because you're going to sound fake. Like people will be able to tell. Just, kind of have some decorum and have some posture, but, at the core of it, sound like yourself. But I would find myself finding some degree of comfort in maybe leaning into it a little bit and hamming it up here and there or putting it on a bit. And I'm kind of a monotone person, but adding some more dynamics to my voice that were a little bit unnatural. And I found that maybe it did sound unnatural, but I felt a little bit better by almost impostering what I thought I should have been, which is almost like a different kind of imposter syndrome in a way.
I understand. I'll ask you a question here though. Where did you find that voice that you essentially replicated or imitated? Like, were you listening to someone and said, I'm going to sound a bit more like that?
That's an interesting question. There were a couple people whose cadence I would try to mimic, I think, like Kai Ryssdal from Marketplace on NPR. Trying to think of who else, but I definitely, it stood out to me when people had an imperfect voice, so to speak. They just sounded like someone who maybe didn't have a traditional radio voice, didn't have that deep basement voice, had maybe kind of a higher pitched voice. There's like the Ira Glass kind of voice, and like he sounds on the radio like he talks. And so just hearing more people, just like you were saying earlier about, like kind of where you are right now, if there's somebody else with Tourette who wants to be in your position, or David Begnaud's position, or, just people who are on TV against maybe what the public might assume is possible for somebody with Tourette syndrome. It's like seeing myself kind of out there. Okay, these are plain spoken people. They don't sound like they're putting it on. Maybe I can just try to talk like myself. And there are definitely episodes of this podcast, especially early on, where I sound different. I think it's because I had these nerves of, do I need to come off really neutral, or am I too nervous to talk about this authoritatively and I'll just sound like a hack if I do? And it was the same thing. It was like the two people in my head. One is like a really smart, critical person I know. The other is me. And, I can pad myself, but then the smart, critical person will think of a reason or poke a hole in whatever it is I'm doing. And it's almost like I can separate myself from that critic in my head, and I'll think, okay, this critic found something wrong with what I'm doing, and he's seen it, and I can't see it yet, but he's seen it, and that would be enough for me to back out of something or not follow through on something. Just like you were saying, like the punchline isn't coming through, and I think it got really, really bad over a period of time, and that's when the depression, anxiety really kind of can have their way with you, and it takes work. It takes these rituals. Do I get coffee in the morning when I have to be on the radio, or am I going to be too jittery? Or a lot can psych yourself out in that process, but it's just that practice of being intentional with doing it and trying to find that balance that's right for you, or where you might feel comfortable.
Absolutely. And one thing I found is when I first started, I would listen to every different radio show I possibly could, and I'd find a favorite. And what would happen over time is I would start imitating them and the way they spoke, or the way their jokes or anything like that. And I would listen, I'd go, oh, like for example, when I started doing comedy, I would sound like Ricky Gervais or certain other, like Dave Chappelle, Eddie Murphy. And on stage, I'd sound like them. And what I learned is I was just being a bad version of them instead of a good version of myself. And what happened in radio, I had to get to a point where I thought, I'm not going to listen to anyone anymore, because I'm just being bad versions of that person that I idolize. And it's ruining my brand. So I had to just remove myself and stop listening to everyone else. And instead, I just was me, and I expressed myself. And when I found I did that, that's when I really started to find my own and really started to get better as a radio person.
Yeah.
When I stopped listening to everyone else, which is weird because you kind of need to know what everyone else is doing in that industry. But yeah, I found that when you're trying to be someone else, you're just a bad version of them. And something that is extremely attractive is when someone is themselves unapologetically. It's like a flame because you're yourself in all aspects and you're unapologetic about it. And you're like, this is me. And it's like, wow, geez, you're a wrecking ball coming in, like hop out of their way. But it's hard to do, because I think radio really helped me with that, because it encourages you to be vulnerable. It encourages you to show certain sides, and it encourages you to have proper formed opinions, not just what the newspaper's saying. And so it actually guided me through, being myself. And it was I need to thank radio, because it helped me in a lot of areas of my life.
Yeah, I would say the same for myself, maybe kind of in a different way, but it is where I do specifically remember, not a single moment, but I do specifically remember working at this radio station and getting more confident over time, and certain producers that were there saying, like, you're getting way better at bantering, just things like that, or saying things off the cuff that are completely appropriate for the discussion. And, I don't have to, shoot myself down halfway through because I'm worried what I'm going to say is inappropriate. It's just, you kind of get better. The autopilot gets better. And it's almost like you can put more things on autopilot to focus on new things that you want to work on or overcome, or whatever word you want to use. And which I guess is probably has to be true to some degree for everybody. I would assume that, we practice, it becomes part of us, second nature. Then we can work on new ways to supplement it or modify it or take it somewhere completely new. But it is hard thinking of all the people that I see as charismatic. These were all very sort of like enigmatic artist type people. And I think what I like is that they didn't really sacrifice much, except, the big sort of like, this is not consistent with, say, like public opinion or public trends or whatever it is. It's this artist doing something new and challenging. And looking back at it historically, it's like, this is amazing. This guy was a genius. But it's so hard to do at the time because of the fallout that you might feel, which I guess is the big piece of fear that a lot of people have to even start, like cross the beginning line, like you were saying.
Yeah. And look, and just as you were talking then, I kind of thought of some situations where there are so many times where I'll see someone who completely owns the room and they own the room more than I do. And I can get really intimidated, and I am faced with those situations again of, how do I act? How are they going to react to it? And, is there going to be a clash between us, or I think they're really, the way they carry themselves is a really attractive social form. And I want to replicate it. And then I fall into that trap of being them. I start walking like them, and I start, replicating the way they speak and things like that. And I have to catch myself, and I say, hey, you're not that person. You don't have to be the loudest in the room. Just because you did that, just because you naturally fall into it sometimes, it doesn't mean you have to always be that. And something I noticed years and years ago was being an extrovert, being the loud person, cracking the jokes or whatever. You're the subject of a lot of people's put downs, and you're the subject of a lot of people's jokes, and people use you as a, what's the correct word here? They use you as a gateway for themselves to have input. So an example would be, we're all having a discussion. I'd be too loud, and they'd put me down because, one, they think you're confident enough to handle that. And two, it takes the attention away from me if I put you down. And so I found that constantly in groups, I'd always be being put down, and my things were being rejected. And I was like, why am I always the brunt of the joke here? Why am I never taken seriously? And then it took me a while. It took me a few years of doing this constantly, and understanding that in the group of situation, I was the brunt of the joke. I was, in banter situations, always being put down and things like this. And I thought, I'm the escape for everyone to feel comfortable. I'm the escape that everyone uses so they can feel more confident in themselves. And when I understood that, I accepted it. And when I saw it happen, I went, okay, they feel comfortable now, because it's almost like a lifeline. They're like, oh, say it about Seamus. Then I'm involved, you know, and it gives them the confidence to actually involve themselves in a group discussion. And then I kind of felt empowered, and I was a bit more like, oh, that's actually, I can see them getting more comfortable. I can see them being more comfortable with me, and I can see them being comfortable in themselves. And I kind of accepted the fact that was my role. And so that's who I am, which is a weird thing. And I don't mean this blatantly, offensively calling me names. I just mean, like, you know, it's like the your annoying little brother that you love, that you can't, you know what I mean? It's come here, mate, and you love him to bits, and he's annoying, but I don't know. That's the way. It was a really interesting learning curve, because I really struggled with it for so long, because I was like, why aren't I, you know, who's a good example? Why aren't I the James Fallon that everyone loves? But instead I was like a carrot top. That's such a weird analogy. But yeah, it took me a while to understand where I sit when I make people comfortable.
What was the third pillar that you mentioned?
Determination. So absolute determination, stopping at nothing. When you find your passion, you constantly work towards it all day, every day. You become obsessed with it and you work your ass off. And having that determination, you will get there. One day it will happen. You just never stop. And I used to say this all the time when it came to radio, because in regional Australia, there are all these different radio stations, and you've got a guy and a girl and their co-hosts. They're put together, and all you're doing is begging to get to a capital city. You're working your ass off so you can be a breakfast radio host in a capital city. And I always said, the difference between you and someone else who's vying for that capital city job is whoever gives up first. So if they give up first, well, then you're going to be in front of the line. If you give up, well, then you're out of the game. But if you never give up and you become absolutely determined, eventually you get there. It's just a matter of time.
Right. Yeah. And there's someone I talk to sometimes, another photographer or amateur photographer, but someone who wants to do this for a living, and not somebody from the Tourette community, just somebody I know. And she's real hard on herself. There's imposter syndrome. There is I remember one text, it was like, I'm doing everything right. I'm not getting enough likes or followers. Just do my photos suck or whatever. And I was like, you've been doing this for 5 months. You know, this is like, I think your stuff is good, but 5 months from now, it's not going to look like this. It's going to look better if you stick with it. And it's not like you just get automatic success with everything. I mean, which sounds so simple to say, but people, I think, especially when it comes to online approval and followers and likes and what counts as validation and what doesn't, is it's really, I feel like it's really sped up people's perception of what success is and how long it takes to get there. Because I think they see a lot of young people who have hit it, but I don't see necessarily and I could be wrong because I'm not talking about data that I've seen or anything like that, but I have a feeling that the young people who are successful are like very quickly successful and they're making millions of dollars off their craft on Instagram or YouTube or whatever, are kind of the exception to the rule. They're not exactly the trend. And you have a huge posse if you are down on yourself with your talent. And, you know, that's where the nice part of community comes in, where I don't know if you can hear that. My cat knocked down.
I was going to say, is that a cat? That has cat written all over it, man.
But yeah, it's like, I think people can get frustrated pretty quickly. And I think it's really sad if an early bout of frustration talks you out of doing something that you might be really good at 1 year from now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's why it's really important you have to fall in love with the process and you have to fall in love with what you're doing, regardless of the success. Yeah. So yes. I love stand-up comedy. I love it. It is so much fun. I feel that's who I am. I am a comic. I am a stand-up comedian. It is what I do. So I have made the decision that I will do it for the rest of my life. I don't care if I get a paycheck for it or not. It's just something that I am, so I do it. And I understand that it takes 10 years of doing sets in clubs to no crowd, to constantly working on material, to throwing away material, having bad gigs, constantly, until you actually get good. And that's why they say, you're an overnight success 10 years in the making. And
right. Yeah.
Because you have to, and this is why when people say to me, how do I, what should I do to get into radio? And I say, just start, just do it, have a podcast.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the followers. Just do the action and fall in love with the action of actually doing it. And over time, you get better, you get good. And that's when you start getting recognized. And when you mentioned before about young people with instant success, they're really rare situations. Like in the radio industry here in Australia, what we do is we get a reality television star, or we get a football or a sports star, and we put them in a breakfast radio job in a capital city. Now that job is absolute idolized by all of the little radio presenters that want to make it, right? But, that's what they do because it sells. People know them, so they put them on, so they listen. It's a marketing thing. You got to understand that. And so what my mindset towards that is, okay, they've got the job, but can they keep it? So have they got what it takes to actually stay in that position? And there are so many different people who have gotten that role and sucked at it because they weren't a radio presenter and then they were fired or let go. And then there were others that, professional football stars that became a radio star and they kept the job. 20 years later, they've still got the job because they worked on it. They didn't just give up the moment they got the first paycheck. They were actually, fell in love with the process. And to me, those people deserve to be there just as much as everyone else. If you can last the test of time, then you deserve it more, or you deserve it just the same as everyone else. And I think it's the same thing, for example, with Instagram. This is so, relevant to everyone with social media. Mm-hmm. If you constantly obsess over what to post, what not to post, this person's going to judge me for that, this person, what do I do? But if you post every single day for the next 10 years, you are going to get so many followers. Like your following is going to be huge. You are going to earn so much money from influencing. You're going to have so many people supporting your posts. You're going to have so many people hating your posts. And you cannot have success without critics. Like if you don't have critics, then you're not successful. And in radio, we used to go, how many complaints have we got? Have we had a complaint this week? When do we get a complaint? Because that means people are listening. And what I'm noticing now is I completely deleted my old Instagram. I had 5,000 followers on it, and I started a brand new one with this new kind of brand, this new image, this new trajectory. And I've built it up very little. Like I've only got 850, I think it is. So it's very small at the moment. But I'm posting every day, and I'm starting to get some people, reach out to me or make judgmental comments and things like that. And I'm like, yes, good. The critics, the having critics is a sign that you're on your way to being noticed. And with Instagram, I do it still to this day. In fact, I did it last night as I went to post something because I'm trying to post every day. And I was like, this person's going to judge me. This person's going to think that I'm trying to be Tony Robbins. And I'm like, what should I do? But I just had to post it. That's what are you going to do?
Yeah, well, you're on your mark, and I remember the first time I got something wrong in the newspaper when I was a newspaper reporter. And I remember I got an email about it from a reader, and it made me sick to my stomach because wow, the nature of the job is I'm supposed to be right. And I got something wrong and everybody read it. And oh my God, the governor's from here. Maybe he read it too. And, just for the most part, people don't notice unless you happen to know it's wrong. And I'm not saying that relieves, mistakes in media. You correct it and you own it and you move on. But that was such a heavy speed bump for me, realizing I got something wrong, wondering what the fallout was going to be when I go down the street to pick up a coffee, or people staring at me of oh, that's that idiot reporter, or, just whatever you can do to yourself and this crowd that you stuff inside yourself to criticize yourself. And I don't know if I mean this or not. I was about to say, it's almost like these people are like the self-critic that you install on yourself is almost like a set of arm floats in a pool, because it's almost like they keep you out of the deep end, or they keep you out of trouble because it's you enforcing a timidness on yourself. And maybe I'm just speaking for myself and that's how it worked for me, but yeah.
I agree with you. And something that kind of helped me was understanding, hey, people don't care. People don't care that much. They're too self-orientated and they're too worried about themselves and their own life to actually go out of their way to judge you. So that was one of the really big things that, and just like you said, when you had that spelling mistake, so many people would have gone, if they picked it up, they would have gone, and they would have pushed on. Like, people make mistakes. And that was something that I had to really kind of come to terms with, is when you're on radio and people are driving to work, if you stuff up, you say something wrong, they don't care. Like, they go, whatever. It's just so people are too worried about themselves to care too much about someone else. And I kind of have to reinforce that a lot to reassure myself, hey, you're not going to get judged that badly. Hey, you're not going to be hated too much. Hey, you're not going to be this, because it's just a protecting mechanism, I guess. Yeah. That's one thing I've noticed. Yeah.
Well, with you had mentioned and had used words early on in this conversation, like overcoming, and, which I guess is not to say that there aren't, challenges in front of you. You're not living like a completely flat ground, streamlined life. What's still in front of you? Like what does intimidate you or challenge you?
One thing that I noticed what intimidated me recently was there's another speech that I'm working on to take to corporate companies. We're talking about large companies with lots of money, businessmen. And as I've written it out, I started feeling myself being hesitant towards taking those first steps, towards actually putting together the necessary pieces I need to put together the email, to make the contact, to actually practice the speech. And I thought, why am I being hesitant? And I wrote it down. I said, why am I scared of this? And the answer was, because I'm scared of the large, intimidating corporate businessman questioning my credibility, thinking that I'm not good enough. So again, just a different form of imposter syndrome. And then I wrote, the next question was, well, how do I fix that? And the answer was to become an expert in that area. So I need to research everything I can to reaffirm what I'm going to say is valid, and what I'm going to provide you, I have the credibility for, because I've done this work. And I just kind of laid it out like that. And I found it's a little bit easier. I can see the path. And also, because I'm now on my own, I've actually turned down 4 radio jobs since I've decided to do this new career. And you fall into this trap of the fear of the unknown. And it's so intimidating, thinking, well, I've got nothing in my calendar. Well, I've got no money. What's going to happen? And I just completely freak out. And that is definitely an intimidating thing, until I actually wrote this down in my phone to kind of give myself the reassurance to keep going. And I'll read it out. Oh dear, here we go. Fear of the unknown only happens when you don't have a plan. The future hasn't happened yet, so there is no point worrying about what may or may not happen. You can build your future. You can choose your own future. Think about what you want and who you want to be, and ask yourself, what is the best way to get there? Then start laying down the right foundations to build the future you desire. There is no reason to fear your own plans. Because, I kind of was intimidated about the fact that I've contacted 300 schools here in Australia in the last 2 weeks. And I've only had maybe 30 of them get back to me. And I think, ooh, what have I done? Like, maybe I should have taken that job, But it's like, well, hang on. Well, why don't you contact 500 instead? Put together the plan, reach out to everyone. The reason why, it looks like a bare calendar in 2022 is because you haven't exposed yourself enough yet. So keep exposing yourself. Upload the video on TikTok, upload the video on Instagram, upload the video on LinkedIn, reach out to 500 schools, just stick to your plan, and then and the fruits of that will come. And I guess that's the intimidating part, is having a bare calendar for 2022.
Well, I mean, just goes back to what you said at the beginning, is, you just got to start, and, you can either just run away from it, or you can start and begin and see what happens, and expect maybe some degree of frustration, difficulty, all that stuff that you feel when you start something new. And But I think that's the cool thing about going through it is that, you can get somewhere and you can try something brand new if you want later on. And it's, I've done that before, and I've had thoughts about that, should there be like a complete career change for me, or, or am I just going to, kind of keep waiting for something to come to me, or, what's it going to be? And that's, it's scary, and it's a lot to consider, lots of variables, but I mean, people do it. People make it. Like somebody has that job that you're dreaming about and you want. Like somebody's got it and they got there somehow.
Yeah, totally. And that's where you have to question why them, not me? Because at the end of the day, we're all humans. We're all the same. We are all the same. No one is better than anyone else or different in any regard. You're all the same. So that's what I used to question. Like, for example, I love Leonardo DiCaprio. He is my favorite actor. I love him. And Jim Carrey. Oh my gosh. Like, if I ever met him, I don't think I'd ever be able to move. I'd be like, I'd breathe. But, he's a human. He's the same as me in terms of emotions and thoughts and insecurities and everything. And that was kind of what I was trying to say before about a sporting professional getting a breakfast radio job, something that I desire, but I'm not I don't have that. I'm not a professional sports star. I don't have that notoriety, which is stopping me from getting that job, or that they got it over me. But the difference between that professional sports star and myself, once we're both at the same level of breakfast radio levels, or at a metro station at a capital city, the difference is how long will each other last, if that's what I was trying to say before, if that makes sense. Like, you have to both work your ass off to stay there. And so, I mean, I'm not saying I'm Jim Carrey or Leonardo DiCaprio, but we're the same. Like, we're humans. Everyone's a human. We just put people on a pedestal.
Right. Right. Yeah. The sort of like God making that we do with celebrities who just, maybe they did grow up in a privileged environment. Maybe they came from a really difficult environment, but I mean, that's I guess that's kind of to your point, is there's not necessarily just one uniform that makes it through. Like, there's, struggles that we have with diversity and equity and just involvement with different kinds of people, portrayals, the Tourette community, like that's still a thing that we gotta get right. Are we, like, how long is the demeaning portrayal going to exist? Is that going to be off limits one day? Like, other things might be when it comes to, childhood disorders and things that kids experience. And that's still something that we're trying to get right. But that's, in a way, that's almost like an inverse motivator for me. I was like, these people that I'm like intimidated by, who seem really smart, I know for a fact they have this thing wrong about me, or about Tourette syndrome, or about anybody with Tourette syndrome. Like, I know that they have this wrong because they don't understand it well enough. This is something I know better than them. And there's probably other things I know better than them too. And that was like a recent thought that I had, and I'm okay with myself now. I'm not like worried really quite as much about public perception with regard to Tourette, but that was a realization of like, I have a life experience these people don't have, and that's why they don't get it. And this is something where maybe I could, I don't want to say like use it to my advantage, but just apply that life experience to help me be more empathetic in conversations with them or with anybody else, to where they feel more comfortable talking with me. And just like you were saying, with like those like staff meetings where you're kind of like the sort of like comfort focal point for people, and kind of identifying that like maybe that's what you can do. And I've kind of been not trying that out, but just letting that happen more when people send something vulnerable about me and they want to come to me to talk to me about like their vulnerability. And they're doing that because they know I have one too. I'm not going to judge them. And like, that is a powerful thing to me that I feel like I'm glad I have, but it's completely because of the hard times and the struggles and the lack of self-acceptance over the years. And then what it means to me to finally be self-accepting and open with myself. Not when I was 20, not when I was 30, but when I was like 38, that's when I opened up, 37 or 38. And that's, if you're 10 years old, that feels like a long time into the future.
Yeah.
But but that time period is when I was honing my skills, and when I was an introvert and staying in my room and drawing pictures and learning about audio production and teaching myself things. I mean, that's kind of how all that happened. And I do feel good about that now.
that skill set. I felt good about it before, but that's when the imposter syndrome is happening and I can't let anybody see this, or they're going to shoot it down and I'm going to feel bad about this forever and not want to pursue this thing that I like. But it's like you develop a level of confidence and you get there and you're proud of your work and you're like, okay, if people don't like this, maybe it's just because, they like something else. I made this because I like it. This is what I wanted to see or what I wanted to hear. And that's fine with me. Somebody else out there is probably going to agree. If it's a minority of people, okay, it's a taste thing or something. But if I write a song, for example, and someone hates it, I'm like, okay, you just don't like that kind of music maybe, or maybe it does suck and I'll just do something else. Write another song that might be better. It's not my one shot. And sometimes just meeting one person who can be a naysayer can like plant like such a devastating seed in your head that can follow you around. And sometimes that becomes like the bully in your head. Like that becomes the character of like, yeah, this guy acknowledged to me publicly that I'm a weirdo and I'm just going to keep thinking this, like I trust that guy. He seems smart. He thinks I'm a weirdo. Maybe I probably am. It's like you can just poison your head like that so easily.
Totally. Absolutely. And something I struggled with for years was negative self-talk. Oh my gosh. Like all day.
Oh, me too.
All day, every day.
Self-deprecation all the time.
Oh, and it was soul destroying, for years and years and years. And it's only been in the last year that I've started trialing different exercises to find that positivity. One of them is I reject negativity from people. So if people come to me with just complaining about nothing, I just kind of pull myself away from them just to kind of, I don't want to hear negativity about for no reason. What's the positive? Yeah. And then honestly, I gratitude journal. Like every single day, I write at least 3 things that I'm grateful for, and they could be small, they could be large, whatever. And I'm just slowly training my brain to look for those positive things, to look for, find the positive and just reaffirm positivity into my own life mentally. And I am finding that because I just went through a breakup and that was a really difficult thing, but it helped so much through that. Like it really helped me, stop thinking about my shortcomings in the relationship, accept the shortcomings so I can work on it. And it also helped me, to start accepting my personality and how I am and look at the positive sides and just ignore the negatives. And honestly, I found instant relief after writing 3 things I was grateful for. My positive self-talk improved and I felt instantly better.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like a chemical change or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we got to do a part 2. We've been going for more than an hour, and that's hard to believe. I mean, we gotta sign back up at some point, maybe kick off the next season or something like that. But there's so much I know we haven't covered from your own personal story, and I appreciate you sharing your perspective on this episode, because I mean, it's great. Like if we just said, be yourself, that sounds like just tried advice. But I think if you break it down the way we have, I mean, it helps me by listening to that stuff. It is that repetition of, reminding yourself how things can work versus how, you can kind of doom yourself and chase yourself away from something you do love. And so, yeah, it's always good to just have these thinking exercises like we just did. So I definitely want to encourage people to check you out. I mean, where can people find you online? What's your social media, your website, all that?
So Facebook and Instagram is Mr. Seamus Evans, and it's Seamus is SEAMUS. And my website is seamusevans.com.
Well, Seamus, thank you so much. I mean, this was really great. And I mean, part 2 in the future.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thank you so much for having me. I've had an absolute ball. Can't wait for next time, man.
Thanks for listening, and to Seamus Evans for spending time with us. There's a lot we didn't hit about his life with Tourette, and I'm banking on a follow-up episode with him at some point to dig in even deeper. All the same, grateful for how he opened up in his talk with us here. SeamusEvans.com to see and learn more about him. Again, Seamus is spelled SEAMUS. SeamusEvans.com. Tourette's podcast is made possible by the Tourette Association of America, online at tourette.org. Don't forget to check out their upcoming webinars and other events, including the Tourette Gala in October. We have listeners on every populated continent, not just the United States and Canada, but of course Australia, which has its own Tourette Association. And there's Tourette's Action in the UK, there's Tourette Brazil. There's a lot of support around the world, but yeah, lots of places that don't have that level of support they need. And I've heard from you about that. A couple guests coming up who were in those positions of living in a place where they just don't have that support. And they don't really know what to do about it. That's ahead. Tourette'sPodcast.com and GeeksRising.com for all the past episodes. We're on our 7th season of the podcast now, and all the past seasons and episodes are available for you to listen to, always for free. Tourette'sPodcast.com. They're also at Tourette.org. And GeeksRising.com is the home of the Geeks Rising Podcast Network, which connects Tourette's podcast to a big general listening audience. And I'm so thankful for that. The podcast isn't just an echo chamber of sorts. We're not just talking to ourselves. Talking to ourselves is important. It's essential to sound things out. You know, we can think things to ourselves, but if we sound it out or hear somebody else say it, then, you know, it becomes different at that point. But I'm really happy that it's rippling outside of the community as well, thanks to Geeks Rising and everyone who shares an episode. Patreon.com/Tourette's Podcast if you'd like to make a small cup of coffee kind of contribution to the show. It's massively appreciated, and if you contributed, I would love to thank you publicly on the show. All right, that is it for this week. We will talk to you next time. This is Ben.